Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn. Welcome to Why Not, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously because, as Stan said, every character is someone's favorite, so treat them that way. This season, we'll be looking at Canada's premier superhero team, Alpha Flight.
And in the words of the famous philosopher whose name escapes me, why not? We're going to start at the beginning, look at what made Alpha Flight work, what didn't work, and enjoy a romp through the lesser-read realm of the 616.
So there's a actually shocking amount of history to dig through before you'd even want to tackle Alpha Flight number one, which is something I've discovered in the process of us getting this thing going.
There's like 14 appearances before Alpha Flight number one.
I mean, so just, a little peek behind the curtain, folks. Initially, we were just going to do start with Alpha Flight number one and rip through her. And we found out pretty fast that there's some stuff you might want to know before you even touch Alpha Flight number one.
So we backed up a month. We read a bunch of stuff. We've recorded this 3-4 times, and now we understand Alpha Flight, and we're ready to help walk you through this because I have had a whole lot of fun getting through this, Tom. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been fascinating too, just to see how a team, I don't know, is sort of very quietly seeded into another property, and then when it gets its breakout, it actually feels like something very different from everything else that's going on in the comic universe generally, but certainly the Marvel universe.
Right. They come together kind of like the Avengers, of being that they had their own stories leading up to this, except they didn't star in their own series for years and years before they got them brought together. And the way that the stories get told as Alpha Flight, the series, starts is a different form of storytelling that I found absolutely engaging and drew me in. So anyway, we're getting so far ahead of ourselves. So back to the prehistory of the team of Alpha Flight. A lot of people remember them just as the jerks who show up to steal Wolverine from the X-Men from the cartoon, and that is just a travesty for Alpha Flight. So we meet them in media res, and it isn't until the first dozens issues of the Alpha Flight series proper that we get actual origin stories for our core group, our original six, our 06.
We're going to start with Wolverine's first appearances because they are filled with hints and hooks of what would eventually become Alpha Flight, Department H, Weapon X, and all the characters we have come to know and love. Wolverine's first appearance is in late 1974. As a last page cameo in The Incredible Hulk number 180 and properly in issue 181. This is written by Len Wein, arts by, Chris, you're going to have to help me with some of these names.
Art by Herb Trimpe, colors by Glynis Oliver, and lettered by adorable Artie Simek. Artie Simek has been lettering comics since like day one with Stan. And Stan used to, he was Stan the Man Lee and Jack the King Kirby, and it was adorable Artie Simek as what they would tag him as. So,
how did Artie feel about that being called the adorable one?
Yeah, Stan also generally shit on his letterers in those names and called them derisive names. So adorable, we're just going to run with adorable and move on with it. Anyway, nice to see Artie Simek still getting work in 1974. So in this issue, the Hulk is in Canada fighting the mythical Wendigo creature. The story itself is utterly unimportant to what we're talking about here. Honestly, what most people remember from this issue is the whiskers on Wolverine's mask.
It's a look, guys. If you haven't seen this look, you want to find it just so it's burned into your memory like it is in ours.
We're going to have art clips from the stuff that we're talking about because we're trying to translate a visual medium to an auditory medium. So we'll have some important things and panels to look at. And it's not going to be like reading the comics. It's just a little something to jog your memory. So check it out. We'll have the website, all that stuff at the end. So the important bits here are that, one, Wolverine IDs himself from the get-go as a government agent who was sent to handle the Hulk. And two, at the end, which is actually technically 182, but anyway, at the end of that story, his military handlers pick him up in a cage clearly designed for their protection, not for Wolverine's. Like, they've got this big techno helicopter and they lower this big round cage with real thick bars. Like, it's not like a pick up a dude cage, it's a get in the cage animal cage. And it's right there on the page from the get-go. Nobody says anything about it. It's an interesting bit of world seeding.
So we next encounter Wolverine in early 1978's classic birth of an era, Giant Size X-Men #1. Written by Chris Claremont, art by David Cockrum, colors again by Glynis Oliver, and lettering by John Costanza, who apparently doesn't need some sort of moniker
No,
because,
well,
yeah,
no, Stan's not doing it anymore. I only threw in the adorable because I read a bunch of Silver Age comics and they're a lot of fun sometimes.
sometimes.
So, Wolverine is at a super secret military base in Quebec where Professor Charles Xavier tells Wolverine that he, Wolverine, is a mutant and offers him, again, Wolverine, a place with the new team of X-Men. Wolverine resigns his job immediately over his military boss's sudden objections and ends those objections by slicing off his boss's tie. So what I'm wondering is, all right, so the boss brings in Wolverine for a meeting with this bigwig, and then the bigwig says, "You want to come with me and join a paramilitary organization?" And then Wolverine says, "Fuck yeah," and they leave. Why did the military guy set up the meeting? So, like, was this Xavier just mind controlling people because this is what Xavier does, prior to what we remember as 90s Xavier? I'm assuming that he mind controlled his way into the meeting, but the boss's reaction after Wolverine tries to leave is to remind Wolverine that we spent a lot of money on you, dude. You can't just walk out of here. You are a major investment and you don't have the ability to leave. So I think like the boss's reaction is just there to remind us of that because that is very much how Canada sees Wolverine from these very beginning moments. That he is property, he has to be controlled, and it's dangerous for us to even try that, but it's even more dangerous if we don't control him.
I think it's also, though, an attempt at establishing Canada and how it functions as pretty shady. Like, it isn't just a function of being property of the government, as oftentimes soldiers can be referred to, but there's something even more taking place there. And I don't know. It's one of those things where you wonder if a somewhat throwaway scene, one that's just designed to introduce a character, ends up informing so much more than was maybe plotted out at the time.
That's why we're covering these two issues, because this is like 3 pages of of comic book, and that's why we're including them here, is because these 3 pages are just filled with stuff you can do stuff with down the line, because it's evocative. It draws a sketch that if you're interested, you can look deeper and see more shadows, and it's I was kind of hooked once I started looking at it from this, because, with Giant Size X-Men, you're meeting a lot of characters all at once in the first issue, and you only get like 2 pages for each of them, and then they all go on an adventure together. And that's one way to introduce a team, and Alpha Flight doesn't do that. And I think, the X-Men were wildly successful. So, I mean, don't think I'm shitting on 70s X-Men here, but I like the way that Alpha Flight got introduced with the characters bouncing around a bit and then coming together and getting this different kind of thing. John Byrne really brought what he wanted to say to the first 13 issues of this series. We know that Canada employs superpowered individuals. We also know that those operatives may not be reliable for the Canadian government, such that they have to be caged, and they might not even be consenting to their employment. Wolverine took this offer so quickly that it's reasonable to infer that he didn't want to be there anymore and took the first ticket out of there.
So Wolverine spends the next 5 years under Chris Claremont's careful eye, being developed from a stabby little rage guy to a layered and nuanced man of honor who earns and reciprocates the respect of his teammates. Many of those adventures took him to outer space and safely away from anyone who was looking for him.
After the drama of the Phoenix Saga, he and the X-Men returned to Earth in X-Men number 109, written by Chris Claremont, art by Dave Cockrum, and eventual Alpha Flight creator John Byrne, colors by Andy Yankas, sorry, Andy, and lettering by Irving Watanabe and Joe Rosen. This is a great X-Men issue on its own. Like, I would hand this issue to anyone who wanted to meet the 70s X-Men team, because it's not high drama. It's not connected really into too much. I mean, you can't disconnect any single Claremont issue from anything else, but it's a lot of character work for the X-Men. But we're going to ignore all that stuff and look at the Alpha Flight part. So, Tom.
So their first day back at the mansion, Wolverine and Co. head out to the woods, going for a picnic. And, well, they were going for a picnic. He was going to go hunt. Storm is offended that he would hunt an animal, and he kind of fires back, suggesting that anyone can hunt to kill, while he hunts to sneak up on a scary doe and get close enough to touch it. Storm is somewhat taken aback, somewhat shamefaced when she realizes that he isn't just being a kill machine, that he's testing himself. It's almost like a form of training in some ways for him. And frankly, ultimately, a challenge. Like he is engaging in a challenging activity, not just trying to go out there and get a little more blood soaked than he already is.
And remember, at this time, the X-Men are still getting to know each other because in Giant Size #1, they met for the first time, and they've, one thing after another. You know how serialized, narrative-driven comics go. So these are not the characters with the layers and layers of development and retcons that modern fans know all about. We know everything about him. No, Wolverine is still this incredible mystery box of nobody knows what he did before, where he came from, what he talks about, none of that stuff. You're just meeting him and it's playing out. Great ride. If you want to read the Claremont X-Men, highly recommend it. Can't recommend it enough.
And I think this is actually a good moment to bring up something that a lot of folks are going to be familiar with, but not realize where it happened. And I didn't know this until an earlier recording where Chris let me know. We are about to meet Weapon Alpha. But you're going to hear the name Weapon Alpha, immediately think of Weapon X and that connection to Wolverine, the Project, all of those things. But Chris, when did Weapon X appear in the comics?
Oh, God, you're putting me on the spot, Tom, because I don't remember the year because we didn't plan this bit out. Thanks, buddy.
Well, I believe the last, what you told me was 1991.
Yeah,
yes.
it was like 6 months before, X-Men #1. The Weapon X storyline that appeared in Marvel Comics Presents that we all think of as this classic 80s story is not. It's such a late addition to Wolverine's story because nobody had cracked into it, and that's when we first find out about how the adamantium happens. Okay, we're vamping off here. If you're going to spring Weapon X, man, you gotta let me know.
Fair enough, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is that we've already mentioned how much of this stuff is being kind of thrown out there, and it's material that you can build off of and build on. But in a way, what we're getting here through Wolverine's interactions, like Wolverine's Canadian employment, through his interactions with Alpha Flight, as we dig into it further, is a lot of the what's considered core Wolverine mythos is all being seeded in these issues, in these appearances.
Yeah, it all blooms out of what it is that's happening here, but this is not that bloom. These are the seeds.
And I just think I think that's kind of it's one of the fun things about serialized storytelling is that there's the ability to pivot, to change, to layer, to recontextualize. And when you go back far enough, you get closer to some of the original ideas and the original moments of that. And it's just, I don't know, there's something joyful about that in my mind.
Well, and this comes with how we meet Alpha Flight and how they're introduced over multiple guest issues. Instead of having years of trying things out and, Iron Man having roller skates and all these goofy things that they do trying to figure out what sticks, for these characters, they just kind of throw out just enough to make them work and then start developing from there. And so you get to skip over, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still some finding their footing here as we get through this stuff, but it really works to make the characters feel more relevant, more ready, more available because they're fully formed. You're just finding out more about them, and it's not used as a mystery box like Lost or something like that, where you never really get to what that mystery is. At this time, you're getting Wolverine's history where they'll tell you, yeah, this is a thing. And then, there will be another thing, but you're not sure if it's before, you're not sure if it's after, you're not sure how they fit together, and you don't know anything more than just the thing. You get more of this when he and Puck start talking, because Puck is sort of like an unclawed Wolverine in terms of being super spy, doing everything. And they talk about, hey, was that you that time in Maracaibo? Oh, yeah, that was me. How'd you know it was me? So they're fun secret agents, but all of that will be revealed. So Wolverine's out in the woods. He's about to get to the doe. Doe gets skittery, and Wolverine is attacked by Weapon Alpha, and he appears to burst out of the ground. It's a very poorly laid out panel, and yet it's going to be repeated so many times over the course of this. So it's his first appearance, and what an appearance it is! He's a perfectly average John Byrne drawn white man wearing the Canadian flag from head to foot. not vertically, but like horizontally. So I guess he's wearing like the left half of the Canadian flag. It's a striking image. It defines the look of Alpha Flight throughout every incarnation it ever has. It's simple and perfect. The red bands go in a straight line from his shoulders into his toes, splitting his legs between red outside and white inside. And the pure white extends all the way up through his face covering helmet. And the only way it gets intruded is with a spiky maple leaf that cuts in from the red. So it's like the left half of the flag.
It's a really incredible look. I mean, I almost feel like it's, setting a tone for how a lot of superhero outfits will look moving forward. If you have any relationship or awareness of like Wildcats or any of those teams, this feels like the version of some of those outfits.
You're starting to get Byrne really flexing his power and showing a lot of eyes are on what he's doing, and people learn from this and move forward. We'll talk more about those outfits as we talk about Alpha Flight together.
As you're saying that this is Byrne flexing his muscles and whatnot. However, this was a character design that Byrne made in high school before he was even professionally making comics. I mean, it's just John Byrne had an eye. Like, he has an eye. He knows how to make something striking.
If you give a high school kid with a pencil the words Canadian and superhero, they'll draw something that looks like within 66% of what Guardian looks like. Like, the concept kind of draws itself, but that doesn't make it any less powerful or less visually striking. It's great. It works. It's simple. It's easy to use in other ways. So, chef's kiss, Byrne. No notes.
So Weapon Alpha hints that he and Wolverine know each other and says he's there to bring Wolverine back to Canada. For the reader's sake, he gives his name as James McDonald Hudson. Over the course of this issue, he'll also be called Jim, Jimmy Boy, and Major Maple Leaf. And very soon, he'll go from Weapon Alpha to Vindicator and then finally to Guardian.
He also calls himself Jimmy Ladd at one point in time. But yeah, referring to James McDonald Hudson as choose your own adventure. I'm going to call him JMH. He's JMH now. That's what we're going to call him.
So in some ways, it's almost like Claremont didn't have a clear idea of who this character was yet. So he just made some stuff happen and then kept kind of circling back to it when he had a better idea and a different idea and just was trying some things out.
Yeah, at this point in time, Weapon Alpha seems like a very generic super dude who shows up and spoiling for a fight. And I may have noted this in the script, and we're going to keep coming back to this. But at one point in time, after Colossus sucker punches him, he says, well, Jimmy Ladd, it looks like you've got a fight on your hands. Well, that's fine by me. And like, everything else we learn about Weapon Alpha from this panel forward tells us JMH would never say that. So it's a real clunker of a line, even on the page. It just makes him look like, I'm all roided up and on speed. I'm here for a fight. It's 1979. Anyway, so Weapon Alpha's superpowers come from his technological battle suit, which he says is the ultimate product of Canadian technology, with zero explanation of what that means.
It means it runs on maple syrup.
Oh, God, we're deep sighs, Tom. Tommy Lee Jones looking over the paper, Tom. So, yeah, the suit has a tight yellow glow around Weapon Alpha when it's activated. He can apparently fly. The colorist here makes his eyes yellow against the white mask helmet thing, and that gets inconsistently done. I think the best explanation is that they're yellow when the suit is powered up, and they're white when the suit is powered down. I like the yellow. But anyway, he seems eager for a Donnybrook.
The fight spills over to a nearby lake where some of the X-Men are having a picnic. Weapon Alpha tries to pull the nothing to see here, citizens. Although maybe it seems like everyone knows he's Canadian pretty fast. And I guess maybe the outfit tells you that. But I like to think that there are a lot of silent A's that aren't included, like that the letterer refused to do.
Well, no, because when Puck gets here, they put the A's in. And so I think that he speaks with a fairly, flat
newscaster voice.
Yeah, we'll give him a newscaster voice, maybe with a little bit of twang to it,
Think Peter Jennings. And my God, does that reference probably date me? We're not that old, folks, but we were old enough to remember the nightly news. And that Peter Jennings called Kissinger a war criminal to his face. So there's that too.
Well, props Peter Jennings. So Weapon Alpha tries nothing to hear them, and he gets sucker punched through several trees by a suddenly transformed into organic steel Colossus. So we know the battle armor can take a serious beating, but Colossus did not know that when he punched Weapon Alpha through several trees. So Colossus saw somebody battling Wolverine and just was like, all right, it's murder time. Here we go.
Yeah, I mean, you pointed this out to me. If we were to extrapolate this from the comic book page to the real world, yeah, Colossus just tried to murk a guy. I mean, like, he knows how strong he is. A normal human being getting punched by a fully powered up Colossus doesn't go flying through trees. They turn to mist.
It's jelly.
Like, they just disappear.
Yeah.
Like, they never existed.
Well, and forgive me for not being as researched as I should be, but I don't know where this falls in relation to the Proteus storyline and whether Colossus has killed Proteus yet, but that's always been a real turning point for that character, that once he kills a guy, everything goes downhill until the 90s, and then the hill falls out and he just free falls. But this is an Alpha Flight podcast, not a Colossus podcast.
For the listeners at home, Chris has some favorites in the comics, but... and Colossus is not necessarily in that top 5. He is, however, one of the points of absolute fascination for Chris. So, yes.
I have always loved Colossus, especially perhaps the doomed generation next from Age of Apocalypse. Oh, God.
That guy is broken. That's like possibly the most broken X-Men character I have ever seen.
Cry every time.
Yeah.
So, in addition to taking a beating, the battlesuit can also send out energy blasts, which I have to stop and think about what name I have to call him now, which Weapon Alpha does at Colossus, only to have it ricochet and injure a nearby Dr. Moira McTaggart, which causes her paramour Banshee to fly at Weapon X in a rage and disrupt the suit's functions with his intensely focused sonic scream. So, the fight heads to the skies, Storm enters the fray, Weapon Alpha realizes he is in way over his head and literally disappears from the fight in midair with a pop sound effect. No explanation given.
He's basically a gaudily, very vibrantly dressed gentleman who shows up, starts a fight, gets his ass whipped, and then decides to run away when it isn't going his way, which doesn't really speak very well to Jimmy Ladd, as he referred to himself, and his... I mean, is it a good decision if your job is retrieval to just get the hell out of Dodge when it's not going well? Sure. Does it reflect well on your ability to actually hold your own in a fight? Not in the least.
For a guy who said he was happy to have a fight on his hands, he did a really bad job of it, is what I'm saying. So, he does cryptically say, next time, to equalize the odds, I'll bring Alpha Flight with me, and thus the stage is set for The X-Men number 120, where the rubber hits the road for Alpha Flight. So, quick production note. You may have heard some rhythmic thrumming on my end of the recording. That's the sound of my... Stop. That's the sound of my embroidery machine stitching out an iron-on patch for my creative outlet, the Excelsior Embroidery Company. So check out excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com for distinctly comic nerdy-themed patches, towels, tote bags, polos, and more. That's what I do. I read comics and I make patches. I make patches, people. That's what I do. And I talk about Alpha Flight for you. All right, and we're back for The X-Men number 120. Same creative team as before, except lettering is by Dan Crespi and Tom Orzechowski. We opened the issue not with the X-Men, but with Weapon Alpha briefing the Canadian Prime Minister about his failed mission.
So a bit of a theme here. The Canadian operations, what we've seen so far, have not been the greatest successes.
They've all been failures, Tom. Just say it. They're
fine,
failures.
They're failures. But this is also kind of...
Why do you hate Canada, Tom?
Because they lost all that maple syrup. All right. They had one job.
They're spending all the maple syrup powering his battle suit.
That is now my headcanon. That big heist. You know about this, right? The massive heist about 4 years ago in Quebec. Someone made off with a few tons of maple syrup, thus causing the maple syrup price across the world to spike because there was a reduction in supply. It was a criminal organization stole maple syrup. The Canadians had one job.
It wasn't a criminal organization.
Well, so this is now my headcanon. They actually needed to power up the real Weapon Alpha.
All right, see, this is fun to talk about, not because I like to make fun of Canadian stereotypes about maple syrup, which Tom does, but because the powering of Guardian's suit is going to become a major plot point down the line. And so thinking of this power pack as being full of maple syrup makes everything a lot more fun for right now. So we'll get there. This is a big step up for Alpha Flight. They get featured on the first page instead of getting the cold open of the X-Men in the Danger Room, which is a Claremont trope, where we get introduced to everybody and their powers. We get introduced to Weapon Alpha and the Prime Minister. So the issue opens up with Weapon Alpha briefing the Prime Minister about his latest failure of a mission, and I appreciate that it shows confidence in the team of Alpha Flight, even if we're again talking about more failed missions.
Chris, who's the Prime Minister he's chatting with?
The Prime Minister is not just named but drawn to actually be real-life Canadian Prime Minister Joseph Philippe Pierre Yves Elliott Trudeau, father of current Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He and JMH have a working relationship.
And this just opens up so many opportunities for an all-new, all-whatever Alpha Flight with Justin Trudeau drawn on the page. That would be...
So help me if for some reason there were to be like a Disney Plus a show of Alpha Flight. I think that having honest to God Justin Trudeau show up as the Prime Minister and do a couple of scenes like this would be amazing and a wonderful tribute to the source material.
And I think you'd have to cast Timothée Chalamet as Trudeau. I was voicing it so you can hear that.
No, I want Justin Trudeau.
Oh,
actual Justin Trudeau. You misunderstood me. I want the real Prime Minister, just like the real Prime Minister in the comic books was the real Prime Minister. You know what I mean? I think that would be great. So anyway, the Prime Minister and apparently all of Canada didn't know about the X-Men and were terribly surprised that the stabby little rage guy that they lost was hanging out with actually competent superheroes who also cared enough to try to keep him.
I think we're picking up on a little bit of a theme here that Canada is employing a superpowered agent and yet somehow doesn't have an intelligence service. They seem not to know. Like they have all of this power and no idea where to direct it or what to pick up on.
Look, at this point in time, we've seen Weapon Alpha, so saying all of this power is a bit of an overstatement.
Fine. They have some power and no information to direct it properly. Better? Do you feel better now, big man?
Yes, I do feel better now. Thank you. You're a good friend, and I value your input. So, and it also tracks that they don't know much about the X-Men, because the X-Men have been spending a lot of time in space. So, and even before that, they're a bit of a myth among society. This is not the 90s where Beast is appearing on television type of thing. Although, I guess he is in the Avengers either right before or around this time. So how did the Avengers say, yeah, this shadowy organization that's pretty much child soldiers on a paramilitary mission, yeah, he's one of us now, he's cool, but no, we're not going to tell you anything else about the rest of this. So I don't quite get how that works.
Yeah, this does, make sense within how Marvel works. Marvel is multiple universes that occasionally become shared universes. Like, how many superheroes exist in New York City that seem not to get involved in the other one's business until it makes sense for Johnny Storm to cameo in Spider-Man?
And this is also, we're in 1979. This is before the era of crossovers. In fact, this is before the first real crossover, which is Contest of Champions, in which Sasquatch is a starring member, to give you an idea of how late the idea of these crossovers start happening. But that will practically be its own episode. So for right now, the PM demands that Dr. Hudson, and that's a first, calling him Doctor, he go and recoup Canada's missing expensive operative. JMA pushes back that Wolverine resigned, and maybe I shouldn't go beat up this guy I know and drag him back here when he doesn't want to be here. It seems that the PM has JMH over a barrel because he blew the last mission, and Wolverine has blown all of his other missions, and somebody needs to show a success for the superhero branch of what's going on here. And JMH knows that his boss is fire me angry about all this. So he puts out the call to Alpha Flight, and we get a half-page intro shot of our players in their civilian guises.
Kicking off with Jean-Paul Bobier, an Olympic and professional ski champion currently in Jasper National Park in Alberta.
Dr. Michael Two-Youngman, MD, staff physician at the Sarcee Reserve Hospital outside Calgary, Alberta.
Corporal Anne McKenzie, records officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Northwest Territory.
Dr. Walter Langowski, PhD, former All-Pro linebacker turned professor of biophysics at McGill University, Montreal.
And Jean-Marie Bobier, a teacher in Quebec.
Yep, I made Tom do all the French names. I learned just enough German to destroy the Spanish I learned, so French just outside my capabilities.
I mean, I think
Thanks, Paul.
it's a bit of an overstatement to say I nailed the French names. So,
Yeah, you are a French translator.
Dear God.
We should just pronounce all the French names like Wayne on Letterkenny, who pronounces French just absolutely phonetically.
That might actually be more offensive to parts of Canada than the maple syrup jokes.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. This half-page panel feels just like an 80s cartoon or an early anime thing. You can hear that like shine sound effect as you look at the image. But this is 1979, so that's actually kind of perfect, for that low-grade animation feel. We now cut to Japan, where the X-Men are boarding a plane to head back home for the first time in a long time. If you've been reading X-Men, you would know that after years with the X-Men and working with Professor X, Wolverine is now healing from his horrific experiences.
Canada didn't get the X-Men comics, and so they still thought he was a dangerous beast that they tried to harness years ago. So as the X-Men approach North America, a freak blizzard envelops their jet and guides them to Calgary with a ferocity that even the weather-wielding Storm is unable to affect. On the runway, once they land, Weapon Alpha shows up demanding that Wolverine give himself up.
And to be fair, it seems a lot more reasonable in Canada and wearing the Canadian flag to say the Canadian government says you need to come with me than it does when the Canadian flag shows up in upstate New York without having arranged anything.
The latter, of course, being an actual international incident. You've sent a very powerful weapon, a self-guided missile, into New York State from Canada. That's kind of a violation of national sovereignty. And Canada doesn't get to do that. Only one of us gets to do that.
Not the first time Canada has... it probably was the first time that we see Canada insert a super agent, but it is not the last before we even get to Alpha Flight 1. We'll come back to all this in Alpha Flight 17 when we see these early missions from JMH's point of view, and it's interesting what they make work and what they doesn't work. So, as the X-Men are on their private jet, Sasquatch stops it from taking off by lifting it up from underneath, and you see him in silhouette, and nobody really knows what he is or who he is, just that he's really strong. He does call JMH Vindicator for the first time here, despite the PM calling him Weapon Alpha just a couple pages ago. This guy has more names than Kanye.
I don't know how I feel about that joke, but here we are.
Tommy Lee Jones over the paper.
Very much so. So Vindicator, I guess we're just going to go with that, chides him for him being Sasquatch for not just stopping the plane, but, chucking a plane across a tarmac. And Sasquatch's response and excuse is he doesn't know his own strength, which seems like a weird thing for someone who's being deployed as part of a super team to state. But
after accidentally throwing a jet into a hangar and I think it catches on fire.
Well, and on top of that, once we get into how Sasquatch got his powers and why, that's a pretty lame excuse. Like, dude has an idea of his strength.
He should. So the X-Men escape in the chaos by Storm whipping up the Storm. And that gets complicated. And they slip away into the city to regroup and make a plan. This is the first of several Deus Ex Storm moments in this arc, and you can tell that Claremont just loves Storm. No offense to Storm.
There are a lot of very powerful mutants in the Marvel Universe. Storm's powers do make her seem like a god a lot of the time.
So, to me, this looks like a shit show for Alpha Flight, like a comedy level, everything going wrong. And so I'm starting to see JMH as the straight man in kind of a workplace comedy. It almost feels a little bit like Peter David X Factor, of a government team with a leader who is not perhaps the greatest leader, trying to look like a leader and do leader things, and everybody around him is just messing up left and right. And he's just like, guys, we talked about this. We talked about this, Sasquatch. All right? Why are we doing this here? Also, there are hints here that Shaman is not able to control the blizzard. So we've seen Vindicator, Shaman, and Sasquatch. We have seen all of them fail to do what they came there to do.
As the X-Men are on the move, Wolverine kind of tries to give them a bit of a download on what they're dealing with. That JMH is the head of a project to develop a team of Canadian superheroes. He started off looking for mutants, found Wolverine, was told by various folks that Wolverine was unstable and psychotic, but JMH believed in him and believed that there was more to him than that.
And crucially, Wolverine says that he was operational while Alpha Flight was recruited, so he doesn't know who they're up against, not their powers, not their numbers. Wolverine was never on Alpha Flight. This is one of those things that people misremember, like the Berenstain Bears, like a Mandela effect.
Which is interesting, right? Like that's totally the thing that most people would know Alpha Flight for being as part of it. And to be fair, Alpha Flight was in some ways built for Wolverine.
Yeah, they'll tell us that expressly very soon.
Right.
So in the city, Nightcrawler is taken down by an intense burst of light from two shadowy flying figures holding hands. One, referred to as Sister, says, "He's a mutant. I do not like hunting my own kind."
Okay, don't do that again. Wolverine, meanwhile, is grabbed off the street by a giant orange furred hand. Like, literally, he walks past an alley, a giant hand comes out, palms his head, and just yoinks him, which is... It's pretty funny looking, actually.
Vindicator finds Storm and Banshee in a mall, and Storm wildly outclasses Vindicator once again, and he runs away once again, but without the pop sound effect.
This brings us to X-Men number 121, the cover of which gives us our first look at Sasquatch, a giant orange-furred, Sasquatch. Like, looks like what you think a Sasquatch looks like, except really bright orange.
Once the name was out there, it pretty much drew itself. Like, again, this is an iconic look that is just sort of like boiled down to the platonic form of, oh, he's called Sasquatch? Okay. Like, this is what he looks like. Great. Cool. Could have gone in a lot of ways. He's got kind of a friendly looking face. He's got really big eyebrows that it swoops out, and it gives his face a very horizontal kind of feel with the arcs going out that way. But it's kind of hard to describe without just saying a big orange furry guy. But he looks fairly friendly, but like he could turn mean. But he doesn't look baseline mean or necessarily terrifying, other than he's 10 freaking feet tall.
The effect of the wide face is almost more like a herd animal than a wolfish or predatory look.
He looks a little bit like Bluto from Labyrinth. Just
Yes.
Standing upright and more like athletic and lean, but yeah, kind of that wide thing without the horns. So yeah,
and Labyrinth is, after all, based off of Alpha Flight's attempts to recapture Wolverine. So there you go.
Yes, book it, done. So Sasquatch wears no clothing. As Sasquatch, he relies on the He-Man style fur for coverage.
I don't know what that means. Please don't tell me what that means.
It's like a fur loincloth. It's like extra fur that grows in the loincloth area.
But wait. But He-Man had a loincloth.
Oh, no, that's not a loincloth.
Okay.
He grew that himself. That's 100% Prince Adam.
When you say he grew that himself, that's such a awful way of phrasing that information. God. Okay, we're moving on. So... The regrouped X-Men minus Banshee follow Vindicator's energy trail to the Calgary Stampede, which is a massive rodeo-themed state fair in Calgary. I mean, it's a big deal. It's a large open space, and there's no one else around to get hurt. So it's a nice way of getting out of the city so that they can really, to borrow a word you used earlier, Chris, that a proper Donnybrook. This suggests that Vindicator might know what he's doing on some level, that he's removing things from a civilian context.
Okay, but what I don't get is he has Wolverine at this point in time. They have Wolverine and they have Nightcrawler. Why don't they just leave Nightcrawler in the Calgary Stampede and leave with Wolverine, because they've achieved what they came for? This Donnybrook is utterly avoidable. However, Jimmy Ladd has gone out of his way to create a space where a proper Donnybrook can be had.
Yes. When I was saying that it suggests he has some tactical sense, sure. And then it's immediately undercut by what they actually proceed to do. Although it might also be, I don't know, there might be an element of trying to prove what the team is capable of. Like that actually they can square off against some other superpowered folks.
I do think that's a good chunk of what is motivating here, is that this is the chance for all of them to come together and show what they've got. Because again, JMH's boss is fire me angry about their performance so far. So there's a lot of bureaucratic politicking background stuff here that we're kind of taking as read if you've ever worked with the government or had to deal with stuff like that as your employment, you can totally understand how many extra layers that adds to superheroing and having to have more results perhaps than, like, say, the New Warriors or something like that. But look how that turned out.
But this, oh god,
It turned out with a bus exploding because they screwed up and a bunch of kids died, and it kicked off civil war, for those of you who don't know.
that was a town exploding, Chris.
No, well, it was a bus in a town. I mean, like, they just referred to the town.
Yeah, but it wasn't just a bus full of kids. It was 300 plus people died.
Well, I guess a bus can't hold 300 people, or it shouldn't.
Really can't? I mean, it could, but that wouldn't be advisable.
I mean, after the blast, it certainly could.
Woof. So we now meet, and the X-Men meet, a fully uniformed and revealed Alpha Flight. We're going to kind of talk looks first, and then we'll start to dig into their powers as they're revealed on the page. Because, to be frank, Alpha Flight has some very powerful individuals in it, and most of them have a better sense of their powers than Sasquatch, it seems. So we kick it off with Shaman. He's a First Peoples man wearing a standard green skin suit with an orange pointed accent panel on the shoulders and upper chest, and a plain brown one-shoulder satchel bag on his hip. His long, straight black hair flows free and is bound by a headband. I'm going to say right now, folks, I did not write this script. I did not know precisely what I was about to read, but I really, really feel like Chris was... I feel a little set up here. I feel like I walked into something I did not mean to walk into. It's somewhere between a fashion show and a misconnection posted online. So, yeah.
Michael is...
I mean, look, he's gorgeous. I'm not saying he's not.
Thank you.
I'm just saying that how you wrote this felt really horny. Like, really horny.
Okay, look, we're going to rip this Band-Aid off. Alpha Flight has more sex and more death than most comic books that I've read, and we're going to be highlighting those as we move through, and you're going to get to it real quick.
Which really reinforces your point about the workplace comedy that we're dealing with here, because...
one more thing. They have team-ups. So what Alpha Flight has more than any other team is sex, death, and team-ups, and that's the story of Alpha Flight.
Sounds like an HR disaster, but yeah, no, this works.
So Snowbird is a pale, blonde woman who has distinctive black eyes with white pupils. She always gives off a sense of being an ethereal type of other character. She's dressed in a white skin suit with light blue underpants over her pants that flow up into a light blue cape, has many pointed tips, kind of like an owl's wing with the feather tips. She also sports a white winged-looking headdress.
Next up, we have North Star and Aurora, who wear matched black and white skin suits with pointed accents at the neck, feet, and hands, with a mirrored star symbol on one hip, North Star on his right and Aurora on her left. They are fair-skinned with inconsistently colored hair, but generally it's a very deep black with white shine instead of the traditional blue shine color for black hair in comics. Think Wolverine. Wolverine gets the black hair with the blue shine more often than not.
Colossus, Jubilee, yeah.
Some issues it will be white, some light gray, but eventually it'll settle into black and white shine that complements the uniform design. It won't come up this issue, but they have distinctly elfin features and pointed ears, and there's just... These two are we're going to have a lot of conversations about these two.
I like and don't like a lot of what's going on, and I don't know if I would like what I like if they didn't have what I didn't like. Parse that, Mrs. Schwartz. Take that.
I don't know who Mrs. Schwartz is.
It's my second grade teacher who taught me how to diagram sentences.
So moving on, as a group, the uniforms really, really work together. Very similarly pointed design elements, but unique color combos, a very similar aesthetic.
Shaman's always throws me off because he's wearing two secondary colors, green and orange, and secondary colors are normally coded as villains in comic books, or at least in combo with primary colors for like morally gray heroes. I don't think I recall Shaman ever going evil, so I don't think this is foreshadowing. It's just showing how Shaman's approach to this superhero thing is different, and how he doesn't really give a fuck what you think about what he's wearing, because he's other in a way that is different than Snowbird, who is a ethereal other. Shaman is very much a cultural other that does not fit into the standard superhero tropes. So once again, Alpha Flight says they're here for Wolverine and no quarrel with the X-Men. Cyclops replies, "Last time you almost killed Moira McTaggart, not to mention us and our flight crew a few hours ago when Sasquatch scragged our plane." That sounds like something Ron Burgundy would say in a warm-up note. Sasquatch scragged our plane. Sasquatch scragged our Sienna.
Now I'm going to think of Cyclops as Ron Burgundy for like in perpetuity, and that actually really works.
Oh, I like it. I like it.
So now we need Will Ferrell as Cyclops. Yeah, I can do that.
So Vindicator deadpan replies, "Those were accidents." And JMH is the hapless boss in a workplace comedy who is being presented by a much more effective boss with all of his failures and has to stand there and make it look like he and his team have totally got this under control. I think there's a lot of humor to be found here if you want to read it that way on the page. If you want to read it as just macho posturing, yeah, sure, but that's like thinking that Rambo is actually about macho posturing. It's not about macho posturing. So, misunderstandings and fisticuffs ensue. Shaman pulls some tiki-looking idols from his satchel that he throws, and they grow to human size, and they fight on his behalf. Northstar and Aurora both possess the ability to run and fly at incredible speeds. I'm not sure who's faster, Northstar or Quicksilver, but I'm looking forward to finding out. They also create a blinding flash of light when they come into physical contact with each other, which is what they did to startle Nightcrawler enough to take him down.
Northstar uses his super speed to sucker punch Cyclops from behind because that's just smart. Like, why would you run at the guy that's blasting things from his eyes like head on? Yeah. Also, Northstar is kind of a dick like that. Like he's not interested necessarily winning by proving he's better. He just kind of wants to win.
He practices the ancient art of fuck you, which is a lot of kicking people while they're down and running away. I love, of all of these, Nightcrawler and Aurora, because she's a tease and he's a flirt, and they just fit together so perfectly as long as they never catch each other. Nightcrawler is always incredibly wholesome when he's womanizing, and that helps now to soften the aggressive sexuality that we'll see from Aurora later. She's essentially making eye contact with Nightcrawler and flies away, and he teleports after her with gusto. Cherchez la femme.
Storm and Snowbird take to the air, where we see Snowbird change into a giant Arctic owl. She is a metamorph, able to take on the form of any animal native to Canada.
Can she take the form of a snowboarder?
This will make a lot more sense once we get into her origin story, which I think is like issue 6 of Alpha Flight proper. For now, we only see her take an owl form and be able to fly without being in that form. So clearly she's got some things going on power-wise.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is it a human-sized owl? I couldn't tell from the art. Did you get a feel for whether it was like an owl size?
The art suggested it was human size, but then also suggested it was owl size. So I don't know if that was like mid-transformation. She was like big and then started to shrink down. Either way, a like Arctic owl flying at your face sucks, whether they're human sized or owl size. So it's fair for Storm to be like, owl, and like, we have to deal with that.
Yeah, but it's just like even extra, if it's a human-sized one with like, feet the size of whatever. You know what? My bird biology understanding is pretty limited.
It's amazing.
So
amazing the things that you have to know when doing a superhero podcast.
Right. Yes, and the things that we will end up learning. I look forward to it. We should do an annual look back of things we learned that we never thought we'd have to know. So back on the ground, Shaman hits Wolverine with a bit of extra wind from his magic powders, which he pulls out of his satchel, and they do magic things for him. It actually makes more sense down the line, but for now, he's just the all-around mystic man. He pulls things out of his pouch, and it's whatever he needs, and it does whatever he does. He's Deus Ex Satchel.
Sasquatch takes everything Colossus can dish out and pounds him down easily. We're really seeing Sasquatch as being set up as like shockingly top tier strength here.
Yeah, when he threw the jet, JMH said, "I thought only the Hulk was capable of doing things like that," which JMH also is a product of the Canadian Intelligence Service, so who knows?
Right. Cyclops then reminds Colossus that he's more than just a brawler, which leads to Colossus going, "Oh, right," and he just flips Sasquatch to the ground.
And we don't see him again, and then like Sasquatch is out of the fight. Go figure.
Yeah, like, I mean, and to be fair, like if someone like Colossus is going to use your own power against you add his to it and slam you into the unyielding earth, yeah, that's just going to hurt, man.
Well, and he probably also got breached by JMH, and he was like, look, if we go up against a guy who looks like he's made out of metal, I just want you all to know that dude tried to kill me. All right?
So play dead. Basically, like, just play dead.
Yeah,
if he gets you in a position where he can punch you as hard as he wants in the face, just pretend you're dead and hope he doesn't.
Well, okay, both Colossus and Sasquatch are what I call the have to go get punched by the Hulk club, because nobody can actually fight the Hulk. Nobody can win against the Hulk. But when there's a Hulk problem, there are certain people who have to go out there and get punched by the Hulk. It's called have to go out and get punched by the Hulk club.
You couldn't come up with something more pithy to describe that club?
I'll leave that to our listeners. If somebody has a good one for that, I'm all ears. You know what? Maybe there was a great one that was coined in 1987 or something that I just haven't read yet, because maybe I'm one of today's lucky 10,000. So Aurora pauses from her game of hide and seek to think that if times were different, this would be fun. And at heart, I'm a lover. Whereupon Nightcrawler bamps in, kisses her, and bamps away, shouting, "Tally-ho!" I love Nightcrawler and Aurora.
We're pretty much immediately seeing a difference between Aurora and Northstar. It's visually obvious that they are twins. I don't remember if they actually are stated as such in the comic.
Not yet.
I don't believe so. But
yeah,
the combination of their suits, their features, their matching powers, like they're obviously twins. And Aurora is clearly the more tenderhearted of the two, as she's playing hide and seek with Nightcrawler, and Northstar is sneaking up behind people and punching them in the head.
Yeah, he's impetuous and rude, and she is flighty and having fun with that superhero life.
Right.
She's also, and we have to say this, sexy. It's not because we're horn dogs or anything, but this is a fundamental part of her character, for all the good and ill this will bring us in the future, that comes through from the very first appearances, that she is a woman who is feeling herself and is enjoying what she's doing, and seems to be a bit of a thrill seeker at this point in time.
Wolverine and Vindicator had a one-on-one fight and a bit of an emotional denouement, where Vindicator reminds Wolverine
Denouement, bruv. Hey, it's French, so you know what? If we're going to go flat for it, so we go with denouement. There we go.
Are you done?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Where Vindicator reminds Wolverine that he, Vindicator, and Heather, first time we're hearing about Heather, gave him, quote, a home, a chance to be human instead of the feral wild child you'd been, end quote. We'll meet Heather in the next episode and examine the Wolverine-Heather JMH throuple, but for now, this is just another Claremontian hook of more detail, more story waiting to be told, which Claremont excels at.
So meanwhile, the mystical blizzard outside is geometrically growing. The last bit of powder that Shaman used to dispatch Wolverine had thrown the Storm out of whack, and he is no longer in control. Storm, the X-Man, realizes this and quickly bags Snowbird owl form in her unstable molecule cape. One more Deus Ex Storm for this story arc. She uses all of her power to redirect the energy of a continent-sized blizzard, and throwing shade at Shaman the whole time for thinking that he knew what he was doing. As she collapses on the ground, Northstar sucker punches her from behind. This seems to be his signature move, and I honestly don't blame him. If you're super fast, sucker punch from behind, man. 9 times out of 10, it works every time.
And being a sucker punch from behind sucks.
Yeah, except this time, Cyclops shoots Northstar in the face with an I-beam and climbs on his prone form to beat the shit out of him by hand. Scotty is clearly not okay. I really hope that he talks to someone about his grief and his traumatic childhood, because otherwise things are not going to go well for that young man.
Foreshadowing. So Wolverine sees that this is no longer a fun little scrap, but a dangerous one, and ends the fight, agreeing to go with Alpha Flight if they let the X-Men go because, he's a man of honor now, and he's trying to protect his people.
So again, they load Wolverine into an excessively secure vehicle, like an overbuilt prison truck, something or other, that they say is made out of metal that even he can't cut through. And one of the guards calls Wolverine short and dumb, where Wolverine immediately threatens to kill him. So, old habits die hard for the Canadian super soldier special forces, I guess, and also for the Canadian super soldiers. As they're leaving, the truck drives off. Colossus observes that Wolverine is not an animal, Cyclops. That man did not have to treat him like that. To which Nightcrawler says, "They are not as lucky as V, Colossus. They know only the surface Wolverine. They know nothing of his true self."
Okay, so you're gonna do like a lousy French accent, and you're not gonna lean into some weird German like sounding thing for Nightcrawler, really?
You yelled at me about the French. Okay, you know what? We're finding our footing. We're finding our voices. You want me to redo it with a lean in on the Russian and the German?
Yes, and this is all staying in. Yes, I demand a Russian accent. I demand a German accent, or the podcast is over.
So we're trying to make an auditory equivalent of the Claremontian dialects.
Yes.
All right, here we go. All right, so as the truck drives off, Colossus observes, "Wolverine is not an animal, Cyclops. That man did not have to treat him like that." Nightcrawler says, "They are not as lucky as V, Colossus. They know only the surface Wolverine. They know nothing of his true self."
Thank you. I am mollified.
All right, here we go. I do Nightcrawler and Colossus. We'll see who you do. As the X-Men enter American airspace, Cyclops immediately tries to turn around to rescue Wolverine, who was sitting in the cockpit the whole time, having Bugs Bunnied his way out from Alpha Flight with, again, zero explanation. So, that is our first arc with the full team of Alpha Flight. Tom, how'd our team do?
Some had good showings. Some had less impressive showings. Definitely hints at some interesting stories to follow, and just enough mystery to want to know a bit more about what's going on. You know, they fought the X-Men to a standstill. They didn't lose.
Now, the X-Men are also real tired, and I think it really matters that they're coming off a real bang, bang, bang string of adventures here. I think if they had had a week at the mansion to rest up, and then Alpha Flight comes to the mansion, it ends totally differently. But this is the Eternal Comics conversation,
Fair enough.
Right?
You know, they did fine. Did they succeed in their mission? Absolutely not. Is this going to lead to another scolding from the Prime Minister? You would have to expect.
Sex, death, team-ups, and failures. That's what Alpha Flight has more of than anyone else.
This is the ultimate workplace comedy. Yes.
So I've seen far stupider teams introduced over the years. Like, you can tell when you're reading that there's a team that somebody introduces because they needed a team to do something, and it doesn't matter. Like, you literally don't even know their names. You don't know their powers, or if they are, they're just ham-fistedly shoved into the dialogue boxes, you know?
Well, and also there seems to be a certain internal logic to this team. I mean, you have two speedsters who also can do the whole flash of light thing that's, you know, bright and distracting. You've got your pure strength powerhouse in Sasquatch. You've got someone who can change shape, fly, etc.
You have a tracker, and you have an enclosed rogue fighter in the form of Snowbird.
Yep.
You have a Giles in the form of Shaman, someone who knows what's going on.
Yeah, you have an ill-defined person whose powers can be a little bit of a Deus Ex, but at the same time seem to have some limitations to them. And then in their leader, you have a somewhat ill-defined powerhouse, right? Like
he's an all-rounder.
Yes.
Yeah.
So like there is a balance to this team and something of an internal logic to how they're constructed that suggests that there could be legs there. There could be something interesting that they do.
I'm curious about finding out more in a way that, like, when Contest of Champions happens and they introduce all these characters, I'm like, I don't care about Shamrock from Ireland. Okay, guys. But these all seem to be characters who have an idea and a plan for what's moving forward. And it certainly seems like they're, even if they were created just to give context to Wolverine's history and to help serve to flesh that out, they were done well enough that there's enough to work with there that they turn into the reason that the listeners turned on this podcast instead of something else, you know, characters that we can care about, characters that we connect with, that we can see make mistakes, because this is all about failure, right?
Yep.
And come to terms with it. And I'm looking forward to taking this ride. So that is the first chunk of our prehistory of Alpha Flight. We'll be back next time to cover some more guest appearances that lead up to Alpha Flight number 1, including Machine Man, the X-Men, Marvel 2-in-1, the Incredible Hulk, and that ill-fated international mega crossover, Contest of Champions, and its cavalcade of national stereotypes.